Hello and welcome to the 4th episode of our series dedicated to painting this Fyreslayer dwarf. Today, we're embarking on the exciting challenge of painting non-metallic metals. But instead of going for the typical depiction of cold polished steel, we'll delve into how to create a look of dark, warm iron. This choice is not only more representative of the Dark Iron dwarves, but will also add a unique and authentic touch to our miniature. So, without further ado, let's dive into this thrilling process. I'll begin by creating the first light. To do this, I'll add a bit of light gray and orange to the base black. This hint of orange is crucial, as it will provide the necessary saturation and warmth to represent the metal appropriately. Unlike more reflective metals, dark iron absorbs and diffuses light, resulting in softer and less direct reflections. This subtler light effect is what I aim to replicate. Starting with a dark base of brown or dark gray tones, I'll gradually build up to lighter tones, maintaining warm hues to simulate how light would interact with the irregular texture of iron. In this process, I'm illustrating how natural light would interact with a metallic surface, in this case, a cylinder, establishing a primary light source and two secondary ones. Accurately representing this volumetry will help the observer easily understand the figure. The helmet might seem like a complex feature to tackle at first glance. But to make the process more manageable and efficient, I've decided to adopt a methodical strategy. I'm starting by focusing on outlining all the edges and small areas that, in my analysis, would catch the light more directly. This approach will allow me to establish a clear visual guide right from the beginning, helping me visualize how the light interacts with the helmet's shape. By marking these illuminated zones, I'm not only defining the helmet's overall structure, but also setting a reference point for the rest of my work. This initial mapping technique is crucial for gaining clarity and definition early on, facilitating the gradual development of shadows and midtones. This initial step is particularly important when painting metallic surfaces, where the correct distribution of light and shadow is key to capturing the characteristic shine and texture of metal. By identifying and highlighting the edges and areas of light from the start, I can ensure that each detail of the helmet is realistically lit, contributing to a convincing and visually striking metallic effect. With this solid foundation, I can confidently proceed to the following stages, where I'll add progressively lighter layers and finer details, always guided by this initial layout. This approach not only enhances the quality and realism of the final work, but also turns the painting process into a more structured and satisfying experience. As you've just seen, this time incorporating more light gray and a touch of flesh-based color. The choice of this flesh color is particularly significant. Its composition in yellow tones allows me to increase the brightness without altering the overall warmth of the tone. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss why it's better to avoid using pure white for lightening a mix. You see, when we add pure white to lighten a color, we're not just modifying its brightness, but we're also impacting its saturation and tone. Think of it this way: pure white can dilute the intensity of the original color, leading it toward more pastel or washed out shades. This can be problematic if what I'm aiming for is to maintain the vibrancy and richness of the color. Also, something that many people don't often consider is that white cools down the tones, which is not what I want, especially in this warm metal. Another important consideration is depth. In miniature painting, depth and three-dimensionality are key. Using white to lighten can risk flattening the image, since lighter colors tend to jump to the front. Edge highlighting and more edge highlighting. Whenever I come across a clearly defined edge or a plane where light distinctly interacts with the metal, I paint it without delay. This meticulous approach to painting helps me achieve a clear visual understanding of the piece in a short amount of time. At this moment, I'm not too concerned about possibly extending the illuminated area too much, as I plan to refine and nuance these details later through the application of glazes. The critical thing right now is to focus on creating a smooth and well-defined gradient effect, which will be key in giving the piece a tangible sense of depth and volume. With the axe blade, as you can see, the painting process is constantly evolving, more like a dynamic sketch than a fixed design. Recently, I realized that the illuminated area needed more emphasis, so I decided to expand it. This painting process is a continuous back and forth, where I advance and retreat in my decisions to achieve results that feel natural and organic. I adopt an attitude of fluidity and adaptability that's necessary to paint effectively without sacrificing quality. It's time to bring back the depth of black into the metal, and for this purpose, I'm going to create a very specific glaze. I'll mix 2 drops of water with 1 drop of black ink, aiming for a consistency that allows me to work with subtlety and precision. Remember, to achieve total control over the glaze, it's essential to properly unload the brush before applying it to the figure. When I apply the glaze, I'll do so with utmost delicacy, starting from the illuminated areas and gradually moving towards the shadows, always making sure to finish in the darkest parts. This technique enables me to gradually adjust the intensity of the color in a smooth and natural way, creating a seamless transition that mirrors how light fades into shadow. After this step, I'll be increasing the flesh-based color in my mix, aiming to apply additional highlights on the axe blade. I'll focus particularly on the edges, where the light hits most intensely, to emphasize these key points and make them stand out more prominently. Next, I'll proceed to soften the edge of the axe blade to give it a more realistic appearance. I'll start this process with a black glaze, which will subtly establish the base of the edge. Following that, I'll carefully apply several light glazes to gradually build up and highlight the edge step by step. This technique allows me to adjust the intensity and shine precisely, creating an effect that suggests the sharpness and metallic sheen of a well-honed edge. Finally, I'll add a final highlight to the blade to emphasize its sharpness. This subtle detail is crucial in giving the axe blade an intimidating and deadly look, highlighting the quality and danger it represents in the hands of a Fyreslayer warrior. I'm back with the airbrush now, preparing a specific mix of 5 drops of water to 1 drop of dark red ink. With this mix, my aim is to apply it carefully to the shadows of the metal, minimally affecting the more illuminated areas. The purpose of this step is to add saturation and warmth to the dark metal without losing that essential sense of depth provided by the black. This technique won't just preserve the sense of darkness, but it will also enrich the piece with greater chromatic richness, adding a dimension of warmth that highlights the complexity and beauty of the metal. Precision is key here. Notice how close I keep the airbrush to the miniature, allowing me absolute control over where and how the ink is applied. This level of precision is crucial to ensure that the glaze enhances the shadows without encroaching on the areas that should remain lighter. Precision in using the airbrush is a key element that turns a good painting into an outstanding piece. The ability to subtly handle the trigger determines the exact amount of paint released, while maintaining the correct distance is crucial to ensure that the application is even and precise. This balance between control and finesse is what allows painters to create smooth gradients, subtle shadows, and fine details that elevate the quality of any miniature painting project. As you might have noticed in the previous tutorials, it's crucial for me to recover certain areas of light that may have been diminished after using the airbrush. I focus specifically on re-emphasizing those zones and edges that are key to highlight. This selective technique allows me to accentuate the important details and maintain the integrity of the original design. I'm revisiting the axe blade of the dwarf, focusing on edge highlighting and adding small marks of battle wear. This is much more than just a simple touch-up. It's an opportunity to infuse the miniature with history and character. Each session of edge highlighting doesn't just enhance definition and contrast, it also accentuates the shape and sharpness of the blade, highlighting its role and usage in battle. The marks of battle wear in turn add a level of realism and detail that transform the piece from a generic representation into one with stories to tell. These marks are not just physical details. They are visual narratives that speak of past battles, challenges overcome, and the resilience of the warrior wielding the weapon. Next up, I'm painting the axe's flame in the same way I did the hair and beard. I start with a base layer of pure white, followed by a highly saturated yellow at the center. Then, I encircle this area with a layer of orange. And finally, I paint the metallic part black. This creates a suitable contrast that makes it easier to visually grasp this small but significant part of the miniature. Next, I'll apply undiluted red ink to further enhance the shadows on the metal. This step not only creates a contrast in terms of saturation, but also the sheen of the ink will stand out strikingly against the matte finish of the metal's brightest lights. While this effect might not be very noticeable in photos or videos, in person, it's quite stunning. In miniature painting at this scale, I recommend incorporating various types of contrast wherever possible, including contrasts in saturation, temperature, light value, opacity, and definition. The more contrasts we add to the figure, the richer and more detailed the final appearance will be. In the final stretch of this tutorial, I'll be focusing on further integrating the metal with the figure using yellow, red, and orange glazes. Although it might seem at first that these hues don't stand out clearly against the metal's black background, each of these subtle tones plays a critical role in the overall perception of the figure. By blending these colors together, I'm adding a touch of realism and cohesion to the piece. It's important to understand that in the real world, colors don't exist in isolation as pure blues, reds, or yellows. Instead, they interact with each other, naturally blending and enriching one another. This process of mixing and merging colors reflects how light and the environment affect the appearance of objects. By applying these glazes, I'm not just adding color, I'm also adding depth, warmth, and a sense of naturalness to the miniature. This approach helps create a more harmonious and convincing work, where each shade contributes to the whole, making the figure not just aesthetically appealing but also believable within its fictional setting. In the end, these subtle touches of color are what can transform a simple painting into a representation that truly captures the essence and atmosphere of the character or scene depicted. I'll highlight 3 important points. Dark metal. Instead of aiming for an overly bright non-metallic metal, NMM effect, I focused on achieving a blackened and warm metal look. For this, it's preferable to use orangish tones rather than bluish ones, thereby creating the appearance of aged, forged metal, rich in nuances and depth. Volumetrics. When dealing with the interpretation of a complex element, rely on basic geometry as your guide. Work from shadows to light to create a clear and logical sequence, which aids in understanding and volumetric interpretation of the figure. Inks. Applying inks to shadowed areas not only enriches the color, but also introduces a satin effect. This technique adds significant depth and contrast to the metal, enhancing its texture and visual impact. And that wraps up our 4th video tutorial. I hope you found the tips and techniques shared here to be helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. If you like what you've seen and want to support my channel, consider making a small contribution through Patreon or joining as a channel member and turning on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you in the next episode.